Today we're heading to the place everyone has dreamed of visiting. Of course, we are talking about Sparta, one of the harshest and most warlike states in the history of humankind. Today we will pump our abs, stand in formation under King Leonidas, face Persia, and figure out what really stood behind the feat of the 300. Unfortunately, reality is significantly different from what the movies and video games showed us. But this is exactly why our channel exists. To take apart myths and separate truth from fiction. Would you go to Sparta if you could? Tell us in the comments when you finish watching. Get ready, it's going to be tough. First, you firm ground under our feet. Even the word Sparta is a convenience of later centuries. The people we call Spartans called their homeland Lakedaimon, and themselves Lakedaimonians. Look closely at the classic hoplite shield in images and reconstructions. You will see the Greek letter lambda, the sign of Lakedaimon. Over time, the name of the city Sparta became established in wide usage, especially among Roman authors, and to this day it is the one that has stayed with us. Another misconception: Sparta is not a closed prison city where no one is let in. It is a state, a union of settlements and villages, that lasted for centuries, and its classical power fell in the 6th to 4th centuries BC. At that time, there were many states on the territory of Greece, and our Sparta was located in the south of the Peloponnese Peninsula in the region called Laconia. By the way, the notion of laconic speech came from there, since the people who lived in Sparta cannot be called talkative. Somewhere there in the valley of Laconia between the mountain walls, our Spartan was born, Lacon. To his own, he's just Laki. Not a king, not a demigod, just one of the homioi, that is the equals, full citizens who are expected to live and die for the polis. And so, let's imagine it's 480 BC. Sparta is close to the peak of influence, shaping the politics of a significant part of the Peloponnese, while to the northeast Athens is rising, with whom Sparta does not get along very well. But the immediate threat does not come from Athens. For in the east looms the Achaemenid, in simple terms, is the Persian Empire. It is not interested in the subtleties of differences between the polis. Their goal is simple: to subjugate the entire Greek world. This is a serious problem. It is enough just to look at the map to understand how much more resources, people, and banal unity the Persians have. If Greece is broken into many states that entered into an alliance only in the face of a threat, then the Persians fought with a single front. Persia moves like a continental machine, and yet it will lose. But why? Because for the Greeks, nowhere to a greater degree than in Sparta, the art of war is sacred. This is their life. In Sparta, society is divided into clear layers. At the top are full citizens, homoioi. Let me remind you that our Laki is one of them. Around them are the perioti, free but not citizens, craftsmen, traders, shipbuilders from places like Githyon. There are also states half inside, and for example the Neodamodes, helots later freed for military service. But at the very bottom are the helots, state dependents attached to the land. The larger part of the population working on the Spartan kleroi, that is on the state plots of land. In Sparta, these plots were held by citizens. For example, the family of our Lacon could have a dozen elots with land plots under their authority. On paper, they were serfs and were obliged to provide Lacon's family with a fixed percentage of the harvest. The difference between Sparta and other states of that time was that the master could not in any way increase this percentage. It was set by law. Lacon was lucky to be a citizen of Sparta. After all, for one citizen, there were as many as 10 elots, who often staged uprisings. After such escapades, they were punished as harshly as possible. And once a year, the Spartan rulers even declared war on their own helots in order to cut out the most violent and keep everyone in obedience. Yes, you did not mishear. The Spartans actually declared war on themselves. After all, we are talking about one of the most brutal states in history. And now about how a real warrior is raised here. At 7 years old, Laki, like all the other guys, leaves his family and gets into the barracks, the Agoge. There he is taught to run, wrestle, throw, fight, and even to read and count, which was unusual for those times. All this is not for the so-called general development, but for a specific goal: to teach to survive, to submit to the formation, and to command at one's own level. An elder always watches over each group. The boys walk barefoot in order to strengthen their gait. For all seasons of the year, they had only one cloak, a chlamys. They ate that very infamous black broth, melazomos. It is a blood pork soup with vinegar. To eat this was practically impossible, therefore the children often lived in hunger, which forced them to steal. The state, in turn, even encourages this. Stealing food was allowed. They punished not for the theft, but for getting caught. However, the thief who wasn't caught was even praised for the skills shown. Now, about a myth that stubbornly does not die. Did they throw unsuitable infants off cliffs? The most cited source, Plutarch, writing centuries later, mentions that children who seemed suspicious to the council were thrown from the Apothetai cliff. Supposedly no one asked the parents, and the matter was compulsory. The trouble is that Greek historians love to embellish reality. In fact, everything was simpler. The practice of killing children was widespread not only in Sparta, but also in other regions of Greece and Rome. But it applied to severely ill infants so that they would not suffer. And for moderately incomplete citizens, there existed an entire estate. They were called hypomaions. Yes, such guys were not very respected, but still they were not thrown from a mountain. An archaeologist long ago studied all the gorges where children allegedly were thrown and did not find any remains there. Let us return to Laconia. Until about 12 years old, the boys walk almost without clothes. They sleep on mats of reed and grass collected by themselves. By the way, they had such a method that in the cold they rubbed themselves with nettles, because the burning speeds up the blood and the body became warmer. The final test in late adolescence takes place at the shrine of Artemis Orthia. He was located high in the mountains, and the test consisted of a most severe flogging. The boy had to endure a bunch of blows with a whip, which stopped only after the first blood. And if a Spartan broke into a cry, the blows continued even after the blood, only increasing in intensity. Such is the graduation exam of a Spartan warrior. Our Laki is a good fellow and passes this exam perfectly. Now he is assigned to a common table, that is, to a small group with which he eats, trains, and goes on campaign. And so, since Laki has only just begun military service to the state. To understand all its difficulty, let's talk about pay. Per month he received a standard ration. It is about 3.5 measures of barley, 2.5 kilograms of cheese, a kilogram of dates, and roughly a few liters of wine. With money in Sparta, it's a separate story. Seeking to avoid luxury and inequality, the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus came up with an interesting solution. For accumulating silver and gold, the death penalty was introduced. Therefore, inside the polis in use were iron rods weighing about 700 grams each, heavy and inconvenient, which you cannot put in a small purse and cannot hide in a fold of clothing. And this is exactly their point, because a large deal, a bribe, or an attempt to accumulate too much can no longer be concealed from neighbors and from those who ask questions. Foreigners arriving in Sparta with the usual silver coins were faced with the fact that inside the city they are almost not accepted. And this is also part of the overall logic. We live by our own rules and make everyone take this order into account if you have entered our land. Such a scheme eradicated corruption, robberies, and plunder at the root. So Lacon, in addition to the meager ration, received several rods. For them, it was possible to buy 10 kilograms of meat and somehow survive, while training in a murderous daily regime. Now, about what the Spartans knew how to do best, and for the sake of which, in fact, this whole system was built. About the formation that turned many separate people into one working organism, where no one runs forward for glory, and each does his part at the right moment. Lacon's equipment is typical for that time. A round shield, a sturdy helmet, protection for the legs and for the torso, a cuirass. And although in beautiful pictures they often draw a bare torso, in real battle no one strives for beauty, because the main thing is to return alive and preserve the formation. But there were also light Spartan infantrymen. These guys fought with everything, for from the age of 7 they were trained in the possession of any weapon. And now we come to the date that should be kept in mind because the whole conversation is tied around it. To 480 BC, when the Persian king Xerxes leads a huge army into Greece. At that moment, Sparta is ruled by King Leonidas, who, like everyone around, is an excellent warrior. Everyone is familiar with the film about the 300 Spartans, and we will not repeat the obvious things, but will only focus on the differences between the film and reality. Let's assume that our Laki will be among the 300. Together with King Leonidas, who really fought on the front line together with the warriors, Lakedaimon holds the defense against the Persian army in the pass of Thermopylae. According to various estimates, there were up to 250,000 Persians at Thermopylae, and only 7,000 Greek warriors opposed them. It is worth noting that the number of Spartans is not accidental. 300 people is the king's personal guard and the most elite warriors. On the first day, the Persians strike head-on, but the strategy does its work. No matter how much they are pushed from behind, they cannot pass quickly because in a narrow place the thing works for which the Spartans built their habit of holding the line for years. The second day is similar to the first. Attacks rise and roll back. Even the best units of the Persians cannot break the line at a dash, and although the Greeks do not gain strength, the attitude holds, because every hour lived is a one future for Greece. And then there happens what, it would seem, is impossible. A local resident, Ephialtes, shows the Persians a path through the pass by which the Greeks can be bypassed from the rear. And this turn-up changes everything, because now the blow will come not only from the front, but also from behind. Greek reconnaissance is not asleep. Leonidas is reported about the bypass, and he has a choice that you cannot call easy. To hold the narrow section as long as possible, or to preserve at least part of the Allied army so that tomorrow, Greece still has people able to go to sea and stand in the field. The king made the decision to immediately send all the army home to save them for the next stage of the war, leaving with him only 300 guardsmen, hoplites. In Sparta, there was no worse sin than retreating from the battlefield without a clear order. Since Leonidas was a king, there was no one to wait for an order from. And so, as not to become an outcast whose name is covered with shame, Leonidas stayed himself, and our Laki also chose a similar fate. The film forgot just one detail. Together with the Spartans, other Greeks also voluntarily remained. In particular, 700 inhabitants of Thespiae and 400 Thebans, and also remained servants and light infantry, people without loud names who carry shields, pass spears, throw stones and javelins. So, against the bypassing Xerxes stood not 300 but about 1,500 people. On the third day, the Greeks themselves take a step forward because waiting until they strike from two sides at once means simply yielding the field without an attempt to fight back. And at this moment, it becomes clear that they are fighting not for salvation, but for the price that they must pay so that Greece wins a little time. Leonidas dies in battle, the remaining warriors fight to the last, but unfortunately they were crushed by numbers, and all the Greeks, including our Lakedaimon, die in that fight. The sacrifice and defeat of the Greeks at Thermopylae does not cancel the fact that they performed a crazy feat. After all, these 1,500 warriors cut down more than 5,000 Persians. And not simple ones, but including the immortals, the guard of the Persian army. In total, over 3 days, 4,000 Greeks died, and the losses of the Persians exceeded this number by more than 5 times. Largely thanks to this psychological factor in the future, the Greeks will win the war and conclude a very favorable peace. Don't be sad about our hero. For a Spartan, the highest honor is to die in battle. They were raised from the very beginning with the slogan, "With the shield" or "On the shield." In Sparta, they valued not loud words, but the fact that you stand in your place when the hour comes. For example, the story of Aristodemus shows this. He fell ill at Thermopylae, and by order of Leonidas went to be treated.
How bad are your injuries?
Oh, it's just a scratch, my king.
And upon returning received the nickname Coward. In 479 near Plataea, where the army of Pausanias defeated the more numerous Persians. Aristodemus, a member of the original detachment of 300 Spartans, became a hero of the battle, but the attitude almost did not change. For Sparta, continuity of duty is important, not a one-time feat. If Spartan boys were sharpened for war from childhood, then girls were raised for motherhood. Their life was much simpler. Girls were taught writing, sports, and their health was carefully looked after. In a sense, Sparta can be considered the progenitor of feminism, for even with weapons, Spartan women coped excellently. For a second, this was a couple of thousand years ago, and only 100 years ago in some countries women could not even vote. This clearly demonstrates that progress is a relative thing. But no matter how harsh the life of the Spartans was, they staked out a permanent place for themselves in history. Now let's look at the path of Lachi and an ordinary average Spartan of those times as a whole, from birth to the very end. He is born in a quiet valley between the mountains, early gets into the barracks and learns to live by simple rules. Eat so that you have enough strength, train so as not to let your own down, speak less, do more. In youth, he sits at the common table where they accept you for deeds, not for words. At the same time, he learns the real price of money and of the formation, where battle is not a scene for glory, but teamwork, shoulder to shoulder. At Thermopylae, Lachi takes his last step as part of the bravest warriors, those who stayed, and unfortunately dies together with them. But their steadfastness buys the most precious thing: time for Greece. This time leads to the battles of Salamis and Plataea, where the Persians lose to an already united Greece. The story of Lachi is not about the legend of the 300, but about an ordinary person in the Spartan system, which rests on daily work and responsibility. Leave a like and subscribe. Good luck, and see you soon.